All right, let's get started. Folks will still pile in. Thank you everyone for attending this session today. It's going to be a fireside chat looking at different aspects of Gen AI adoption and impact. Really across both product engineering, particularly security and compliance side of things. So we'll run through some introductions in just a moment. I did want to let everyone know that in the background, we're going to be running some research looking at the state of Gen AI adoption and the impact across the industry, something that our clients and our partners are heavily participating in. So I'm going to drop a link into the chat. If you have a bit of time over the course of the webinar, or if you want to copy it and look at it a little bit later, that's perfectly fine. We're going to follow up with everyone with this link as well. So if you don't get a chance to grab the link, don't worry, we'll follow up with an email afterwards. So my name is Will Lytle. I'm the COO of Plandek. I'm joined today by four fantastic experts covering various aspects of how we think about and deliver product, both from an engineering product side and also wrapping around the security and governance side. Now I'll hand over to them to introduce themselves right now, starting with Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Herity, CISO at Trainline. Been there since October. Previous to that, spent a lot of time in other organizations looking after security privacy as it relates to platform security engineering, product engineering.
Fantastic. And John?
Hi, John Connolly. Most recently, I was at Meta. I'm currently enjoying a break for my next venture. I was the director of product in the trust and safety area of Meta. I'm an engineer by background, way back. Once upon a time, coded neural nets trained by genetic algorithms. I know Ray back from Accenture days. I came up through strategy consulting, then went into PE before landing into the product space. And across the last 20-something years, have come across ML or AI in various different guises. And I'll hand back.
Fantastic. And Gary?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Gary. I'm the VP of Engineering at Trainline, working alongside Rebecca. I look after mainly our B2C customer base. So if you regularly use our app, responsible for all the engineering effort there. And I was previously at Compare the Market, the price comparison website.
And last but not least, Ray.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ray Dogra. So I'm the CPO here at Plandek. I've worked in the tech industry for about 30 or so years now. In fact, slightly more than that, in fact. Got a long time at Accenture, spent some time at HSBC, spent a few years doing some early stage companies, and joined Plandek about a year ago. I'm also an engineer a long time ago by training, and in fact, my not quite genetic algorithms, John, but I was building real-time speech recognition systems back in the early 90s, working with some incredibly smart people who went on to do some very smart things and just about managed to educate me to do just enough to get through my degree. That's me.
Excellent, thank you. So the format for today, we're going to start off with a short presentation Ray is going to walk us through just to do a little bit of scene setting. Then we're just going to have a chat. We're going to have a fireside chat covering AI in the real world, how people are using it, what we're starting to see, how that's starting to evolve, how we think about outcomes that we're trying to deliver, how it's shaping the PDLC, the SDLC, and then finally starting to look a little bit around the governance and security around this, right? How are we thinking about security first, but in a way that really enables innovation and drives innovations within our teams and our organizations? Before we jump into the slides, there's one question I have as a bit of an icebreaker for each one of our panelists today. And if you had a magic AI agent that could take anything off of your plate, what would it be?
I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but basically some life management that crosses over both work and life. I guess you need milk and we've got AI to go and do a grocery shop, or you need to be here at a certain time, or do you really want to send that email? Probably with some passive and proactive capability in line with all the right governance, of course.
Fantastic. How about you, John?
So I'll plus one, actually. I think I prefer Rebecca's one. If that's possible, I'll definitely have it. I went a little bit less ambitiously. I'd like something to know everything I've written and just read everything that comes across my desk and tell me if it's novel or not. Does it reinforce what I've already read? Does it contradict something? Just pre-do that. And I wanted this from way back when I was in Springer Nature looking at academic papers. I want to be able to tell how novel is this for you? What's new in it for you? So somebody could develop that for me and send it to me by the end of the webinar. That'd be great.
Hey, Gary, how about you?
I'm fully with Rebecca. I need life diary management, figuring out where I'm supposed to be and what I'm doing. Managing personal and work diaries is very frustrating, and anyone who can finally get permissions to work across managing multiple diaries will get my money.
I reckon your wife has just spun up an instance of Cursor and is developing that for you right now.
She's the one asking me to do it. Yeah.
Exactly. All right, Ray, how about you?
Well, I'm going to be very boring and stick with a work-related thing. I would just like a really nice avatar that could just go to the meetings that I don't really want to go to, sit on the end of calls and just say really smart things that I probably couldn't come up with. If you can do that, then I've probably got enough time to do all my life planning myself. So that's my one.
We need a Turing bot to confirm if the real Ray is actually attending this webinar today. All right. So I'll hand over to Ray to walk us through a bit of a scene setting slides for the conversation we're about to have. Before I do, just a quick one for everyone. You'll find a little Q&A box towards the bottom. So as we get into the chat today, I'm definitely very keen to incorporate questions that people are asking or thoughts that you might have into the conversation that we're having. So I do encourage you, put your ideas down in there, and we'll definitely try to incorporate it into the conversation that we're having as we go through today. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand over to Ray.
Thanks, Will. We thought we'd do a few slides just to really scene set, but obviously the power of these sort of things is definitely in the conversation. So what I'll do is, in the next sort of 10 minutes or so, give a little bit of things that we're seeing, observing, and doing, and hopefully tee up some points for our discussion a little bit later on. I think it's fair to say that there's sort of interest in, AI usage within coding in particular and software development. We've just seen a massive increase of interest. This is Google Trends over the last few years, and you can just see the massive spike really since the start of the year, all about people wanting to know how to use these tools and what to do. And so I think it's really, we've sort of gone from last year, people are looking at things thinking, wow, into now is the time that I want to do stuff. And there's some enormous claims knocking around, and there's some very fancy demos that people brought very, very quickly. A couple of quotes there. One, from earlier in the year from BCG, looking at some things which I know has got quite a lot of circulation amongst people that I speak with, and then one from just this week from Satya at Microsoft, making claims about how much stuff was written by AI, and a little sort of almost party trick that I was doing earlier this year was just in a restaurant having a conversation with people about these sorts of topics, and just let's build an app for this restaurant, and we'll do that in real time using Cursor and doing that in minutes, and just as an illustration of how easy it is to do things to get some stuff up and running. But I think if that's all the sort of the hype and the hope, I think there's then some concerns about kind of what's real and what can actually be done right now. Is it really for serious engineering? Do we end up sacrificing quality and security for speed? Do we end up with unmaintainable things, and you get the illusion of speed, but actually things with a lot of storing up lots of hidden costs? And then our developers, scared, right, about jobs and what it takes to be successful going forward. So really, we've gone from the wow to the yes, it's something we need to be feeling we need to do now. So how do we do it? Becomes ever more the questions on people's minds. And there's 4 big questions really that we'll unpack in this chat when we start to. But I thought I'd just touch on a little bit beforehand. First is one of adoption. How many people are using it? Is it actually being used across the piece? And the research we'll mention is our attempt to try and do a little bit of contribution to the knowledge base around that. More broadly. The second thing is around usage. What's it being used for? Then what's the impact? And then really, what's going to change? How is the actual process is going to change and be reinvented and reimagined through these new tools? On the adoption side of things, the stats themselves don't matter, but I think what I observe is this is almost the first thing that companies who are looking at these tools and adopting them in their organization want to know. We've enabled people to use Copilot, Cursor, Devin, whatever. How much is being used? Is it being used daily, weekly, monthly? What differences am I seeing between people using it different amounts? What is it being used for in terms of code bases and so on? usage and what it's being used for. And again, loads of things to unpack around that in terms of the types of things and so on. One that I find particularly interesting and I look at amongst our guys using it is really whether using it in chat mode or in the sort of autocomplete suggestion mode. So, I'm very relaxed that my product managers are doing a hell of a lot of stuff around generating ideas, generating prototypes. The number one, how it comes through on the slide, but the number one user of Cursor in our org for chat is one of our product managers, and a very low user in terms of completion. But actually, from an engineer's point of view, it's completely the reverse. They're using it as a tool to help build out code and speed up their process development, and a bit less in the expansive chat way. And I find that a very interesting and I think a comforting way in terms of how it's being used by different people. And observing that and encouraging people to do things differently, I think, then becomes an important thing. Impact, I think, is a topic that comes through hugely, and we'll certainly spend some time later on talking about this. But the way we've tried to sort of measure that is what's the impact on some of those engineering metrics that we can possibly more easily track and influence, whether that's speed things, productivity things, or indeed quality things. And do we see some of those trade-offs going on between teams, either teams using it heavily or more or less heavily, and what's happened to some of those metrics on those, or indeed cohorts of people, teams using it, and then other teams who aren't using it, or how it changed in the past when they were using it less. So I think there's a bunch of things there on the engineering metric side you can look at, and then obviously then trying to translate those things through into ROI values. And then the fourth of those questions, reinvention, I think is, for me, possibly the most interesting thing. Having spent a long time and seen a lot of different technical waves coming through, I think one thing that we almost certainly know is when things change, there's a discussion about X% improvement on things, but really what happens is that there's a new approaches get created, new ways of doing things come along, and that's where it gets really interesting and also really hard to really see what's going forward. So what it almost certainly won't be is we see a software value chain or process that's broadly as it is now, and we see point improvements in every little bit, and those point improvements add up to a bigger number, and we get some savings. And that's typically the analysis that tends to come through. It's sort of things we can be comfortable with, and we can see those bits there, and that's useful to do sometimes. But I think it really tends to sort of mask what really happens, which is a change in process. So I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but what I thought I would just do is take a minute or so of just what is it we're doing, and therefore, how we're trying to sort of embrace some of these tools and use them. If you take a sort of a very simplified SDLC, the same picture as before, just in a loop, it's the classic, I design something, we build it, we see how it performs in the market and support it, and then we make updates to it. So a pretty classic cycle and a classic set of tools that get used through it. And what some of the things we're really trying to do is to say, how do we adopt some of these tools at different stages of that process? And we're further in some aspects and not as far in other aspects and other parts of it. And what is it we can start to do it differently? And I'll just, in the interest of time, touch on a couple of things here. One is in the design phase, where more and more now we're pushing to not do prototypes or not do static designs in Figma, not even do prototypes in Figma, but actually get through, whether it's through Bolt or indeed with some of our designers a little bit more tech literate and PMs a bit more tech literate, using actually Cursor and that sort of chat mode I was describing earlier, to essentially create, using componentry and these tools, a fully working prototype that's, I wouldn't say is production ready, but allows a much more engaging conversation, whether that's with customers or internally, on what we're trying to achieve. So that sort of vision into working code compressed a bit there. And then in the sort of build phase, then applying the better engineering disciplines clearly around actually turning some of those prototypes into production code, compressing that by using the same design components as we are code components, which has been a tech debt work in progress to get in place, and also bringing in board some of the coding standards and security standards into the knowledge bases there to again try and sort of provide some of those guardrails around what gets built, and making some decent progress here. I would say we're further behind in terms of using it in the evaluation, but again, taking the signals we get from some of the tools, the launch Darklys, the Delighted, the Heaps, and so on, even Slack, frankly, and Intercom, and feeding those right now more through Claude or ChatGPT to help generate insights and ideas, and potentially in time through the cursors, the windsurfs, the devins, effectively to try and turn some of those ideas a little bit more directly into actionable things we might do, or even little snippets of fixes and things. And then obviously we're back into a loop here of making those updates. So this is sort of the path that we're trying to sort of set out and work on as we build out Plandek, using some of these tools and how we do it, so we learn what some of the things are. And I sort of, in terms of the sort of getting going message, really, as a sort of final slide before allowing us to have a chat around some of this stuff, sort of the mantra I've tried to instill here is that we adopt things first. So just let people, I'm not too fussed about which tools they're using. If they're comfortable with one thing, then let them use that. If it's another thing, let them use that. And we've evolved a little bit as we've gone along. Measure, so understand what's going on in different things, and also frankly learning what to measure. We started with measuring, are people using them, then starting to measure what they're using it for, then starting to focus more and more on what's the impact it's having and what deltas do we see between those different cohorts, and adapting accordingly. But I think for me it was the getting us going and the things we did to get that going that was the most impactful stuff, I suppose, and then the rest we're seeing coming through. So that was it. I think I've stuck to my 10 minutes of sort of introductory stuff. I guess fireside chat time. Will, over to you to moderate amongst us.
Lovely.
I will stop sharing.
Brilliant. So I think, Ray, let me start off with you. As I know, we've been on a bit of a journey trying a variety of different tools over the last couple of years as they've come out, different iterations. From your experience, from the team's experience, what use cases, what tools have really surprised you in terms of their effectiveness, but also their limitations, when applied to real sort of product and engineering? Where are you seeing really interesting gains, but where are you seeing, whether obvious, expected, or unexpected, gaps?
Yep. I'll start off on the positive, sort of the what are we seeing good, and then I'll give a very quick piece on some of the challenges or the limitation things we're seeing. I think on the sort of positive side, I think the ability to go from idea into something very, very fast is incredible. So I was having a Slack chat, for example, with one of our customer success guys the other day on how we might build out a certain feature. That Slack chat I then essentially posted into Cursor, and that pretty much generated me the function that I needed. And this is me as a fairly removed from the detail of what we're doing, that was actually good enough to then progress the conversation into, okay, this is how we're going to build out this thing. That to me was a loop of many days activity compressed into a few minutes, and the number of people involved in that thing compressed into very, very small. So that sort of idea into something that's now allowed us to move it forward, phenomenal. I think where we've seen it go a little awry is where we have people sort of on the dev. I showed those two patterns of usage where we've had developers just going a little bit too, tab complete on stuff, and then we didn't have at the time the guardrails around it to make sure that what was being done was really, properly brought through and controlled and stuff. And so then we ended up with a few things that we probably should have spotted a bit earlier. He got spotted before they went live into anything. He says to reassure his customers, but we could have probably done a little bit more there around playing that stuff. So I think there's still some things about, are these things really ready for prime time? But the ability to get things through faster, and then in the hands of good devs using them the right ways, speeding that up is phenomenal.
And John, where do you think some of the biggest gaps lie at the moment between the sort of the potential versus what teams are actually seeing today, whether they're in kind of a research discovery type mode or trying to bring these things into production level use? And when I say production level, it doesn't mean agentic involved in our products. I think for clarity for everyone, what we're talking here today is using agentic and generative tools to influence and how we actually build product, design product, and deliver product. What's your thinking, John?
So it's sort of it's interesting because the use cases are so diverse. Like making a website for a restaurant or an app is so radically different to embedded software for missile guidance. And one person will see it done like that, fully automated, no need to augment. Everyone else can be out of the loop. And then, someone will pick up, okay, it works. And then the person tries it in the missile guidance use case, and of course it fails horribly. So I think the main thing is to come in with the expectation of augmentation, take what you can get and reassess it very, very frequently. I mean, I remember trying out stuff in the product strategy space back late last year, and the difference between what I did initially and February was mind-blowing. So I'd say focus on augmentation versus full automation. Continually reassess very, very frequently, and then you have to discover it for your own domain. I think the real danger is somebody saying it works, and then because the it is so diverse. We're talking about all product for all things on earth. So I'm kind of pulling back from the question, saying it really does depend, which is never nice to hear. But in general, if you set things up for automation versus augmentation, it's a default fail.
Yeah, no, just to jump in on what John's saying there, I think like the augmentation part is so essential because this isn't about replacing tasks and replacing people to do things. It is about creating a greater sense of discovery and focusing on quality of outcome that we get from using these tools to boost our thinking and boost our productivity and think about the problems in fundamentally new ways. I think Ray covered that in his slides, right? Like this isn't just about productivity. This is about finding new and interesting ways to solve problems with a skill set we've not seen before. And we do that through partnering, and we do that through humans working alongside these tools to get the best outcomes.
And Gary, on that point, it's interesting because I know you guys have been doing loads of different evaluation of products, different teams, different phases. Somebody who's supporting those teams, how do you distinguish between the hype versus things that are actually genuinely driving real opportunity within the teams to be able to, as we say, augment and help us rethink how we deliver value?
Yeah, so I think for us it is about trying to identify what we think the step change will be outside of just a pure productivity angle. I think we want to ensure that people have tools at their disposal that are additive, right? Like the productivity stuff is great, and being able to write more lines of code or automate certain tasks is interesting. But I think like the what over the how is just as important. And whether or not we think we're training something on an existing skill set or just sitting alongside an existing task, like we want to be a bit more selective in making sure it's something that helps us solve a problem in a more scalable, smarter, and ultimately better way over just doing something that's a nice little addition to building our new test framework or writing code better.
Interesting.
And I think to that point, that's why we're trying to maintain a broad view of comparison across all of these tool suggestions so that we can start to then look at the test and learn aspect, but to build onto that, what KPI are we impacting and what is the kind of impact on overall strategy in the AI ecosystem? Obviously, I'm going to say it again, in line with governance.
And I think on that point, it's interesting because I mean, as it evolves the way that we're working, the way we think about it, the new skills that we're developing. Rebecca, how is it changing the way that you and your team think about risk? From a governance, from a security perspective, from a data perspective.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a normal partnership to go fast and innovate and be secure. So I think the first thing we've tried to do is like establish an AI governance framework, which gives us early insight and engagement and move into that, which we've all talked about before, like security and privacy by design, but doing that up front in a way that understands the workflows and use cases that are going to be put into these AI tools. But from a perspective of right sizing the rigor around how we look at that. And that can be parameters of data usage or the number of people involved in a pilot and the data involved in that pilot. So I think it's about, we're definitely forming a better partnership with engineering and product development because of this, because AI is a great amplifier of the bad and the good and the risk. And so working together now early on to ensure, to work out, is this kind of amplifying risk, introducing risk, or in some cases, is it actually mitigating risk? So I think that ultimately it's about the early engagement and having a framework that incorporates all the right stakeholders.
Okay. And Ray, I'm thinking back to a couple of slides that you were discussing earlier, one that kind of looked at a sort of historical model, SDLC, and sort of areas of optimization, more sort of from a task and executionary perspective. When you think about the early stages of adoption, whether, here at Plandek or a lot of the conversations that we have with our customers, what sort of metrics or signals do you think matter more? Which ones matter a little bit less in terms of the conventional or traditional way that we think about the SDLC and how these tools optimize it? You're
Sorry. Yeah, that's the AI avatar I need, isn't it? The AI tool is one that helps you unmute yourself when you're daft.
We now know we have the real Ray in the room.
Yeah. that is the modern Turing test, isn't it? Can you forget to unmute? Yeah, so the look, I think in terms of things that matter less, some of the sort of the pure volume metrics, which a lot of people would have anyway a little skeptical of, I think start to become even more irrelevant. So total lines of code, I think one of our guys 85,000 lines or something the other day. Well, so what? I mean, some of those will be libraries, some of those will be the auto-completed things from here. I think that those things really become very, very meaningless. Arguably they were before. So I think those sort of pure volume things I'm much less interested in. I think and also I think some of the, you get some really interesting thoughts on some of the qualitative sort of survey type things become really interesting to think about the relevance of certain ones of those. If I've now got large parts of my thinking a couple of years ahead, possibly, large part of my developer base are agents or large proportion agent influenced. Some of those interview type questions become interesting to things of what sort of things am I interested in. I'm very interested in the attitude of developers towards using these tools and them coming in. Some of the other things possibly a little bit less so. So I think there's a few things that sort of you just need to rethink about how you measure. I think some of the core overall process things are very important. And I think things that become even more important are they work, which is one of Gary's points, are they working on the right thing? Because if the speed at which you're doing stuff is so much faster, you want to kind of be aiming it more at the right thing, because the consequences of things going a bit wrong may be a little bit more dramatic. So lots of different bits, but I think without being too lengthy, I think those are the pieces.
And I'm interested in everyone's viewpoint here, because I think as different companies, different teams are going to be at different phase of this. I mean, at some point in many contexts, this is going to have a significant impact on the acceleration of how we deliver things to our customers. I mean, Ray used the example of just taking something from idea into a design phase, and then from there being able to iterate and build and deliver something incredibly good. It's going to put a lot of pressure on how we think about speed and efficiency and pipeline. The one thing I think it's going to have a really major impact on is what is it actually that we're targeting in some ways? What is, we always talk about outcome focused product delivery. We work with a lot of product teams. Some of them are very strong at that, some of it's in it, but with the acceleration of how we deliver, I think the outcomes we're trying to achieve, the business outcomes that we're trying to achieve, either high level or quite quantitative in nature, whether it's revenue based or engagement statistic based, really comes into focus. John, I'll start with you on this one to kick us off, but what is your thing? These agentic tools, as we continue to accelerate delivery, how does it change the way that we start to think about, or maybe it's not even think about, maybe it's just the imperative behind and how effectively we're able to really put outcome focused delivery at the forefront of how we're working?
Yes, I guess I first say hopefully everyone is on board with outcome focused delivery, and what this does is it robs you of excuses. So, well, I worked really hard. I don't care how hard you worked. All I care about is what came out. And so it sort of takes that safety blanket away of, well, I tried really hard, and go, well, I don't care about that. Show me how you've actually moved the needle. So I think hopefully this will sort of accelerate people only caring about what you're trying to achieve. Of course, now that sort of, like answers are free, you need better questions, as I think somebody said. So, that actually can be quite stressful, because if you like sort of starting in the middle and just doing some work and not really clarifying what it was you were trying to achieve, then that safety blanket is taken away from you too now. But I don't think this actually changes the fact that you should have been and should remain outcome focused. On the everything will happen faster, I think that is definitely true. I was going to say later, like I think the whole cycle will speed up, but so will the expectation of how good the product should be as well. So, like day one, I'm going to expect that you've got a fully functioning, charming, witty sommelier who greets me on the homepage of the website now, because everyone else has one. So why wouldn't you? So not only might it could be that you can build stuff much faster, but also the bar you need to build to may also rise, which will push things out.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of jump in there on that point, and John, I think you talked about this earlier and saying, getting to that initial idea faster. We're ultimately trying to remove issues and help people make good decisions quicker. And I think if getting a rapid prototype out there that highlights a fundamental flaw in the thinking or the problem that you're solving, you are saving time and you're generating a better product at the end of it. If through ideation and rapid prototyping across engineering, product, and design, you can very quickly establish whether or not everybody's on the same page about the quality of the outcome. There's more time kind of goes into investing in actually what do we think the real problem we're solving here is, if this isn't building in the direction we want it to. And to John's point, I think sometimes we spend a lot of time and energy kind of getting to that, and then we lose some momentum on it. By shortening that cycle, I think we're going to see us invest in solving problems that really matter.
And I think, it's, take your point, John. A lot of all teams should really be ultimately outcome focused. Many organizations, the proximity of the team to the outcome is going to be a function of how the culture and the organizational structure. There's some teams we know who are very, very close, who own the business outcome, and therefore it's constantly on their mind. Other teams might be actually quite far away from it, right? The business outcome is owned out, maybe even outside of product. It might be owned by sales, and product is there to take that outcome and try to translate that into a set of functional requirements, and then engineering teams are expected to deliver there. I'm interested in your views and anyone else on this one. How does this change, start to transition the team's proximity and understanding and outcome of outcome focused delivery?
Yeah, so I'll flag the risk here is that people, in an org that isn't well structured to align people around real outcomes, you rapidly build someone's toy and then they refuse to kill it. So like there's a real risk here now that we spawn all these pet projects very rapidly. And then, as I heard someone is a very disturbing analogy, but someone says like, all these ideas are puppies, they can't all be fed. Someone has to kill them, and it's hard to kill a puppy. It's emotionally difficult to kill a puppy. So now I'm going to have this rapid spawning of puppies as people say, well, here's your prototype done within, a half an hour. And you're going to have to emotionally cope with it not going forward. So there is a danger here that if things aren't actually tied to outcomes and things are done by sort of highest paid person's opinion, people will actually be able to more rapidly emotionally attach to bad ideas. I was once at a product con and people talk about failing fast and said, but how many people have actually killed a product? Very few people have killed off the products. So if we get rapid prototyping and these things aren't actually good ideas, will we have the courage to pull back? On the question of just business structures not aligning to outcomes, every wave that comes along, whether it's ML, AI, or whatever else, is always a good time to adopt best practice. So you can use this AI wave as an excuse to just get on board with what you should have been doing, sort of wrap it in there. But that's more important than this AI revolution, I would say.
I think just to go back to your question there, Will, about a request comes from a sales team. I reflect on my own experience of how my behavior with tools like ChatGPT has changed over the last 2 years, where initially very very tempting to just use it as I would traditional search and put in just one blanket query. How my own behavior has evolved over time in getting the most from tools like that is to be much more intentional and think about the question I'm asking and how that shapes the quality of the response that I get. And I think these tools aren't miracle engines that understand our deepest desires and intent perfectly. The quality of prompts that we give these things equals the quality of result that we get. And I think as more people become familiar in how they engage with agentic tools and understand breaking down the way in which they're framing these requests and these solutions, I think we'll get to people focusing on a better quality of output. So I think over time we'll see a natural upskilling of people asking questions in the right way. And I hope that when people are engaging with teams in requests and ownership of business problems, there's a greater appreciation for how we do that.
And
Can I just add one thing? Sorry, I just want to build on John's comments and also ask Rebecca's opinion on a related point, because I think I'm maybe not quite as emotive as John. I might not talk about killing puppies quite as much, but the notion of shadow IT in any large organization is a huge thing, right? And now we've given these amazing tools to, or we could give these amazing tools to people, and I don't know, the VP of marketing's son or daughter has at the weekend basically built a version of your product, and they've done it, in half an hour with cursor, and why can't you do this in sort of way? But that was always a thing before. I think it gets amplified now, and I'm really kind of intrigued, Rebecca, from a sort of CISO perspective. Like, well, firstly, is Gary going off and doing that on the side by himself, but also more practically, how do you kind of, is that something you worry about, or or what?
I think you kind of answered it in terms of that amplification, and these aren't things that couldn't have been done before. It's just that there's that speed and a capability in the hands of people that might not have been able to do that before. So I think we worry about it in relative terms to external kind of threat landscape, but not to the point where we're focusing our attention too much on that space. It's more going back to your shadow IT question. I think internally, it's the same. I think that somebody mentioned you've got engineers that are like amazing at their craft, and you have people joining that are very new to it, and they're faced with these kind of plethora of tools that can be used. How do you maintain a framework, a governance framework, to allow that kind of broad comparison of tools and experimentation, but in a way that incorporates responsibility across the company for doing so, and that AI literacy piece around what you're using it for and what are those outcomes. But does that answer the question?
I think so. I mean, it's yeah.
a couple questions which I want to incorporate as well, because I think one touches on a little bit of this topic here. From Omar, not all companies out there have learned to have a strategy quite yet from moving to sort of measuring to the adoption phase that you were talking about, Ray. What strategies, and this is again for Ray, for Rebecca, for John, for Gary, I mean, you've all had a relationship to this in different ways. What strategies do you suggest for the companies who get stuck in the sort of evaluation limbo, right? Sort of, we're using it, what the impact is, how do we demonstrate that impact, the use cases? How have you been thinking about taking this from the eval discovery phase into the next phase?
I'm happy to start, and then Gary, I'd love to know, well, anyone actually, what you guys have done as well. I'll tell you one thing we did do that helped us speed up a little bit. So we definitely have pockets. I mean, Christ, I struggle to believe that most developers haven't already started using these things in some way, shape, or form, or that your product guys aren't typing into ChatGPT to come up with your product requirement. Like it's happening. So it is, but whether you're guiding it or not, it is going on. And if you've been running pilots and things, and a sort of, hey, the pilot was really cool, but how do we go from there? One thing we did was we ran the good old fashioned hackathon. So we said to people, right, we're going to do a day. We're going to take some stuff that's on the, the sort of the distant later end of our roadmap, and we're going to try and build a version of it in a day. So it kind of felt real enough that we it wasn't a sort of do whatever you want to come up with a new idea. We wanted to anchor it in things we wanted as a business, but there were features that we were sort of, mulling over how they might work. And we should let's try and build in a day with tools and things. And it felt utterly impossible. We had one thing that we're actually going into production next month that came from it, and a bunch of things that we just advanced our thinking a lot on. And I think what it really did, and this is back to the sort of the question, what it really did was give people, and also as a company, a little bit more confidence that we could actually get some value from these things, and therefore could do a little bit more of a structured, okay, which tools would you like? What other things do we need to do to enable you to make them successful or not? So I do think that sort of, hackathon thing, pick a real problem, bring that forward, I think is something that can help. There's other things as well, but that's the one that sticks in my mind.
Yeah, I think, Tony, to sort of pull at your question a little bit, Omar, is do you think you've got a really strong goal, an outcome, a thing that your pilot is trying to achieve? I think there's a number of things you could look at, whether or not you've set the right measurement, if it's a cost reduction on some existing effort, whether it's a speed or reliability or quality issue, and then carefully, I think, designing the metrics and the evaluation to say whether or not you feel it was successfully met. And I think if you're still meeting resistance at that point or the inertia, how do you reassure that with bringing in people like Rebecca on how you prove that this isn't damaging to your business, and answering the fundamental questions of where you think the risk versus reward is on doing some of these things. But where we're trying to focus at the minute is on really having meaningful and centrally agreed context around what we want those pilots to look like, and we're really challenging ourselves to make sure that they're ambitious. I think when we've looked at some tools in the past, it's been easy to focus on just the productivity angle and how engineers felt about it in their work. And I think it was fairly inconclusive when we looked at it purely through that lens. People said, yeah, it was pretty helpful at writing me write a bit more code. But at that point, was that really worth the investment? Now I think we're trying to take a different view on it, and it's what parts of our estate or what parts of our product experience do we really want to enhance, and how, and what do we want that to feel like, and how do we want that to inspire or supercharge what we do. And so we're very much now trying to look at depth and breadth of the metrics and the feedback that we get across that evaluation. And that's what helps us drive understanding whether or not we move quickly or more tentatively on some of these things.
And I think just to bring in the risk point on that, I think the risks that we're presenting to the business on some of these tools, it's about bringing them in a form to enable those informed decisions. So the accountability for that risk, balanced with the reward, I think is key in some of these conversations as well.
Yeah, I think the evaluation of bringing in an AI note taker onto your meeting calls versus bringing in something that helps you ask questions of your finance reporting is like the risk scale is massively different, and so we apply different measures over the top of those two.
A quick thing, maybe not directly addressing it, but when it comes to evaluating these things, I find it much more interesting to do something you've already done rather than pick a new project. If you do something you've already done, you get hit by the fact of, God, I could have saved 2 weeks. It really hits you. You spent that time and you know how to evaluate it. You know what good looks like. If you pick a brand new thing, it's much harder to assess what good looks like. You may actually misdiagnose it and judge it badly. But I think just emotionally, it's much better to actually go and look at something and say, God, I could have got here 2 weeks faster. I could have done this much better.
John, I think that's brilliant because I think that, given the time to do that test, it was really short, right? So you're not losing much by repeating stuff, are you?
And also my prompt, was, I can say this is abstract, but it's not, for example, my prompt was so much better by having done it, and so you learn, okay, I've done it, now I can prompt. And then you go, well, okay, well then I have to do it the hard way to get to the prompt. So there's no safety. Go, no. Switch your mode of how you use it. Start talking to it about what are the complexities, what is this? Educate yourself via, I'm thinking very much from a product management perspective here, educate yourself on the complexities of the domain, then come up with a great prompt. And then that feeling of, I could have got here so much earlier. And then check emotionally, are you worried by the fact you would have done it faster? Somehow that like the toil had value. And if you speak to the senior people above you, like they don't value that toil. And they really don't. They want it, be nicer to get to a good answer faster. And then you can feel like, I could have advanced it so much further, if I'd saved those 2 weeks. So I'd highly recommend look at things you've already done and attempt to redo them. And then, I'll end it there.
Rebecca, one last bit on the security side. Interesting in your thoughts or guidance suggestions. What sort of guardrails, frameworks, even just advice suggestions have you found most useful in responsibly scaling different AI tools and different AI usage patterns, whether it's business operations or software engineering, over at Trainline?
Yeah, through fear of repeating myself, sorry. But that going back to that governance framework and the right sizing of the controls, assessments, reviews that are required, depending on the use case, depending on the tool, the data, etc. But some of the things we've done are around kind of obviously the third-party review process of tools and establishing kind of ideal parameters in terms of what they have for privacy and security controls, training data, all of those things. So they're the obvious ones. Kind of some of those red team type exercises, probably easier on the build side, but equally when we're applying AI to SDLC processes, it's super useful to be engaged in that and trying to incorporate our threat modeling into the AI kind of process. But I'd say the one that goes across everything is going back to that AI literacy piece and kind of accountability and ensuring that engineers and the rest of the organization are taking that responsibility. So how do you use this? Thinking about the foundations that we already have in place for our data and protecting those things ahead of that going for the use of AI.
And I think one of the strengths that Rebecca brings to that conversation, and two of those elements that are really foundational and help us move at speed, is the literacy piece and the risk modeling. Rebecca often says to me when we have these types of conversations, like it's her job to make me aware of the risk. It's my job to accept it. And like, that's great. And helping me understand where some of the risks are, both in organization appetite, but also privacy and compliance, really does enable me to help answer many of those questions myself, providing that like I'm empowered to do so. And so it's a simple thing to say that have a risk and governance process in place, but as a framework, it's a massive force multiplier, enabling some of that creativity, and people are more able to speak up their ideas or their options on what we might do, all backed by having that safety net and confidence.
Yeah, definitely. To be buzzy about it, guardrails, not gates.
A question from Rams, and an interesting one actually here. There's Ray, you alluded to it with the BCG quote earlier, but there's a plethora of examples out there. Pretty bold claims around the impact that AI has on productivity, right? It's the easy way to sell licenses these days is just say, yeah, it's a 10x, it's a 50%, it's whatever it is. The question that Ramsey is asking is interesting because you obviously, in the world of continuous improvement, what you're really focusing teams on is looking at data and identifying areas to make marginal gains, optimizing small patterns of behavior here, here, and here, which at aggregate, amount to material gains for your technology business in the way that you can focus on delivering value for customers and optimizing how you're delivering. Is there a risk that kind of a bold narrative like 50% productivity gains, 10x throughput, means that teams lose sight on some of the more fundamentals like collaboration, managing your WIP, managing tech debt effectively? Gary, you've got a pretty big team that sits underneath you. How do you balance those two between these kind of large gains, but really keeping teams focused on marginal gains through best practice and continuous improvement?
Yeah, 100%. So I completely agree with Ramsey's point here. Like these are really big numbers that people are putting out there. And I think it's telling and interesting that very rarely are people as transparent at what the metrics they're seeing are and how they've gone about them. It's one thing to say, here's this enormous force multiplier we've got. It's another to be open and transparent with how people have done that. I think like we just want to give people a sense of the size of the disruption and scale and the opportunity that's ahead of them. And I sort of build on some things that Ray and John have both said. I think it is about that incremental gain. And as John rightly said, targeting people around problems they've solved before to help them better understand how they do that. And initially, that might be a small increase in productivity. Over more time, I think that literacy piece and the ambition and the understanding of it will help you identify different problems. When we've looked at metrics around number of times that agentic prompts have been accepted or number of lines of code written, I don't think they help tell the full story, right? Like it's going to be very subjective and situational depending on what you're doing, and it will vary team from team, and it's not a fair measure. I think it's much better to focus on what type of business problems that you would have traditionally put a large number of effort behind. Have you been able to solve more ambitiously and creatively by using an agent to do that instead? And what capacity and focus did that give you to do other things or improve it? So I'd love people to be sharing more about what these metrics mean to them, because it's a very interesting conversation. But we really want to sort of gradually build it in aspiration when we look at it.
I'm happy to give my, if we have time, my quick comments on that as well. I think on the focus on the other metrics, I think that's largely a challenge for leadership, right? To make sure that teams are focused on a balanced set of things. If it's typically incredibly easy in a business to optimize for one thing. If I want to optimize for revenue, I don't spend any money on product development, I spend everything on sales, I guarantee I can grow revenue. I'll be out of business in 3 years' time, but short term we'll grow it. If I want to optimize the other thing, I do the other. It's the same here. So I think leadership has to, yes, we need more ROI on the things, but also if we're not doing the other bits, if we're doing that at the expense of quality, that's a failure of leadership to set that balanced set of objectives. If we're doing it building up loads of other things coming through, we get through things fast, but our flow is down for the other reasons. If there's a real consequence to that, that's a leadership problem. So I think it's you're absolutely right to call it out as a thing to focus on, but then it's a leadership challenge to make sure teams know to focus a balanced thing across multiple productivity pillars, if you like, or metrics.
John, I see you're itching. I'm gonna give you some.
But we've always had this problem as well when somebody sees something takes a day and you go, there's a lot more to be done. None of this has been commented, and someone goes, okay, great. So like it'll take another day. Like no, it takes 29 days. This was a cheap trick, and so like uninformed leadership is so dangerous when they see shiny things. So back to Ray's point, you do need leadership to be properly informed and balanced, etc. I think also, though, there is this challenge that leadership has right now. It's like, how do you inspire people to say, please embrace this? It could be a huge thing for us, versus looking like an idiot who swallowed the Kool-Aid, So, and I think just people need to be very mindful of that and very mindful of the audience that they're talking to. There's a difference between what you're going to say to financial backers about your 3-year plan versus what you expect to show up in tomorrow's shipments.
I think you're definitely right there, John. And when we talk about it internally, I think you feel people are in one of two camps of this is a hype cycle like I've seen before versus this is the most disruptive thing that I've seen in my career. And people do seem to fit between one of those. And you want to, as you say, you want to inspire and you want people to embrace the opportunity ahead of them, but you don't want to sound completely like you're drinking the Kool-Aid and you're being purely the PR people for AI. So it's a difficult balance. Then we have to contextualize it and help people identify the right problems to solve and see it as an augmenter to their work, not a replacement.
Well, brilliant. I mean, that takes us nearly to the end today. We've got about 4 minutes left. I'm sure folks have stuff to wonder. So I have one final question for each of you. I'd like you to kind of walk through, explain. what's one assumption you've had, whether it's on the sort of product development life cycle, the engineering side, or Rebecca, how you think about risk and governance around in your CISO role? What's one assumption you've had that you've really had to challenge or unlearn due to what you've seen in the experience you've had recently with different AI technologies? And what's the new principle you work by, or the new paradigm, the new structure which you think? I'll start with you, Rebecca.
Ooh, tricky one for me, because I try not to make assumptions in my role because it can be quite dangerous. But I think more of an observation, I guess, and again, going back to something I said, I think it's easy in security to think that kind of the shiny innovative is the thing that's most important to software engineers and developers. And actually what I found with the introduction of AI is that we've found the collaboration between, and I think Gary and I have both said it, the collaboration between the two teams now has moved and evolved into much more of a partnership way of working, which is great. So I think not so much an assumption, but definitely a learning and a path forward.
How about you, John?
So I think what I'm going to go with is that just the cycles are likely to just become faster. I think things we were doing things on a 6-month plan, and that was under enormous stress. It was very hard to actually have credibly hold to a 6-month plan. We're moving, say, let's shorten it. I think based on all we've talked about here, whether it's the rate at which new product you develop or your competitors develop and force you to react, or the rate at which systems that we deploy get attacked by bad actors. My sort of feeling is just that a thing that was already under pressure to shorten the planning cycle is just going to increase. And if you were considering breaking it and saying, okay, let's plan on a shorter horizon for some things, then maybe now's the time to say, yeah, let's lean into that.
Gary, how about you?
Yeah, I think the rate of progress over the last couple of years has been mind-blowing. And I think my assumptions have been challenged at how fixed I remain in my viewpoint at any one time and remaining incredibly fluid. I think as John says, like it's time to lean in to the disruption, to think more disruptively about my own thinking. And to just, I think, challenge that we're always looking at validating the decisions we're taking, but kind of not limiting ourselves by thinking, oh, this thing may not pay off. I think with so many things evolving at any one time, the challenge is on all of us to kind of like really chase those down and look at where we think the opportunities are, and never assume anything's going to stay put for too long.
And finally, Ray, how about you?
I'll be very brief because I've only got a few seconds left. I think the thing I've really started to do now is a bit of a pattern for team members. If they're coming to try to book some time, for example, to go through something and they've written out a thing to try and go through. The thing I'm trying to force in people to do is, have you asked this question of chat GPT before you've come to me to ask it? Because if it's just if you're going to ask me something, I'm probably just going to, in front of you, type it into chat GPT and we'll see what it says. And if I can think of something better, then I will. But if I can't, then that's the answer. And you could have probably got that without waiting for, so. And I think it's that mindset of give it a go, try it, use it for things, see what it breaks on. How do you prompt it better that can, really, really pay dividends? And I think as leaders, that's a really good thing to sort of instill in others through doing, through action.
Fair enough. All right, well, I want to say thank you to everyone who spent a bit of time with us today. A special thank you to each of my 4 panelists, Rebecca, Gary, John, and Ray. Thank you for taking time out of your day. For everyone who's joined, we'll definitely follow up afterwards. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll also follow up with you. And if you're in Europe or the UK, enjoy a very lovely day. If you're US based, enjoy the beginning of your day. Hopefully this was a great start to your morning. And thank you again, everyone. We'll speak soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.